So, March Tynwald promised to be something that it didn't turn out to be. Is that a fair assessment, would you say, Christian?
Well, definitely. Yeah, because it was meant to be like this big health Tynwald, wasn't it? It was meant to have loads of stuff to do with the Manx care mandate, but that just never materialised. Both times there was meant to be the £20 million supplementary vote. That got vetoed. Then we've also got the Manx care mandate debate. That was vetoed. So, in essence, it was quite thin around the edges.
Yes, I mean there was some interesting stuff, but yeah, the health minister fairly early on, I think it was because of course there were 3 urgent questions that were asked. One, well, yes, let's talk about the urgent questions. Mr. Moorhouse had an urgent question about to the education minister in relation to tertiary education. He also had an urgent question about the Great North Ambulance Service, and then Mr. Hooper had an urgent question about nurses' pay. And what I discovered, because I hadn't appreciated this in the past, is that urgent questions don't count in relation to the standing order that says question time shall last for 2.5 hours.
I found that out as well. It was only until the president said, now we'll turn to our question paper and our allotted 2.5 hours begins, was when I was like, oh, okay, actually, that didn't count. And that was, 45 minutes to do those 3 questions?
Yeah, and whilst answering one of those questions, the health minister's voice started to fade a little, and she said, bearing in mind what's on the order paper coming up, I hope my voice lasts out. Well, as it happened, she was able to have quite a rest. But yes, interesting. Maybe a future Tynwald in brief, we could look at urgent questions and when is an urgent question really urgent and when isn't it. That's a matter for the president, but it would be interesting just to see from the standing orders.
I do know that there was one other attempt at least to get another urgent question on the order paper, but that was actually rejected.
Yeah.
So I don't know what he kind of has to weigh up, or whether he's allowed a maximum of X number of urgent questions, or there's probably a lot of factors that we're not maybe appreciating.
And still a good 18 months before the next election, so we can expect more of these to come, I suspect. There are then the starred questions. There were 4 starred questions, as it turned out. There were only 3 on the question paper, but question 16 from the Speaker in relation to the storage and disposal of coal tar was down as a starred question.
I think my favourite question out of all of them just has to be Jason Moorhouse asking what changes have been made in the last 6 months to the department's recommendations to civic amenity sites on the disposal of microwaves. Yeah.
Well, the one about pipes as well, I quite like that one, the pipe work under Castle Rushen playing field. But yes, some interesting stuff. You can't help but think that much of it they would have got quicker and more straightforward answers if they'd have just spoken to the minister or written to the department.
That is actually interesting, because I think there was a little study done recently. I can't think what it is off the top of my head, but I remember the figure like 750. I don't know whether that's an accurate figure, but £750 is what I've been told is what it costs roughly per question. Obviously resources dependent, but that's kind of like an average ballpark figure, because they have to do a deep dive and actually pull out all these sometimes niche things, so it's actually quite costly.
And of course the purpose of questions, well, I suppose it depends. Maybe it's evolved since my time. I always thought the purpose of questions was if you had written to the minister or the department and you'd basically been fobbed off on several occasions and you just thought, right, oh well, stuff you then, I'm going to put a question down, and that kind of then gave an incentive to departments that if they got a a message, an email, whatever it was from an MHK, they would do their best to respond to it in a timely and meaningful manner, because they knew that if they didn't, a question would go down. But we seem to have eliminated that stage and just gone straight to questions.
Do you think that's because people know how big social media is now, and there is almost an element of the politicism and the political football, that they can get more coverage out of being played on the radio if there's a verbal question as opposed to a written one?
And I think that works up to a point. That there comes a point when you get so many questions, and so many questions, different attempts at getting the same thing answered, that maybe people's social media feeds get filled with all this stuff, and then they start switching off from it.
It becomes difficult so much, because, like you say, you've got the question which is tabled, but most of the time the actual detail on what they really want to ask is in the supplementaries. But I mean, I can think off the top of my head, Douglas Central, Chris Thomas, he likes to go into a lot of detail, and some of the things he's referring to are decades ago, and from a media standpoint it's actually very difficult to pull all that together and consolidate it in a way that actually means something to ultimately the listener.
Well, now you've mentioned Chris, he regularly says to me things like, "You will recall when you were minister," and I'm thinking, no, I don't have a clue. Anyway, that was questions. 3 questions, 18, 19 and 20. These were all in relation to cancer screening from Mirror's Edge. They were converted to written questions. We got to question 22 out of 27. A move was put to suspend standing orders so that the remainder of the questions could be considered, and basically that was it wasn't lost. It was 11-11 in Keys, and of course 8-0 in Ledgeco. And actually, you need 16 votes in Keys to suspend standing orders. So yes, I suppose it was lost, really. So the remaining, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions. I'm not entirely sure what happens if suspension of standing orders doesn't happen. Does that mean that they're automatically go to written answer? I'm not sure. Maybe if any of the
I think they can. From what I've heard, they can either choose to convert it to written, or they can carry it over to Keys next week. I don't think they have to do any admin as per se. They can kind of just contact the clerk and just say. But yeah, I'd have to check. Yeah.
Well, any standing orders buff that fancies letting us know about that, please do.
That's you, Phil.
Well, maybe. So then we get back to the actual order paper. Well, questions are on the order paper as item 2. Then you go to item 3, and that was ultimately not moved because it hadn't been, or the item hadn't had 4 weeks on the Register of Business. So it goes to a vote to see whether enough members would support a suspension of standing orders. Mr. Speaker was quite concerned about this, and basically seemed to be suggesting that, well, there was a £16.5 million of what appeared to be identified overspend, and then there was a £3.5 million what he described slush fund. And by allowing this vote to go through, you would in effect be voting through £3.5 million that Manx Care could then spend if they wanted to. Of course, some of that information was on a memorandum of an explanatory memorandum, I should say, but that explanatory memorandum didn't make it onto the order paper.
There was actually a bit of almost a hoo-ha about that, because some of the members were saying, well, there's no memorandum here. The Treasury Minister seemed quite insistent that there was a memorandum somewhere. It probably wasn't his fault that it didn't get onto there. That's probably an admin thing. But, I mean, it was on the Register of Business, though. So whether members are right to have not looked at the register perhaps is maybe their own fault. I know that Sian Cowper downstairs in the newsroom, she is a very beady eye on the register. So it was on there, but again, it wasn't on the order paper.
But it's certainly unusual not to have the link to the memo on the order paper, and that had upset a few people too. But then again, it's a £20 million sum of money that Tynwald's being asked for, and the explanatory memorandum was less than 3 pages in length, and the detail was sorely lacking. And again, that was a concern expressed by members. Anyway, that was in essence a defeat for government. I think the minister is talking about coming back now in May for this. I'm not absolutely sure what authority the Manx Care and DHSC has now to spend the overspend. I always understood that you had to have Tynwald's authority to spend that money. There seemed to be a suggestion from someone who ought to know, who wasn't prepared to go on record, that actually that might be the kind of the nice way of doing it, but effectively Treasury has the authority to do what it wants with our money, regardless of Tynwald opinion. But anyway, I guess that the money will be spent, and I guess that at some point, possibly May, we'll find out how much the actual overspend was. We then moved down to Our Island Plan 2025-2026 update. And don't sound so enthusiastic. Some interesting debate. It was, I think it was Chris Thomas sort of describing the love-in from the ministers, because every minister and even a few of the chairs of boards joined in on this. Came forward extolling the virtues of the wonderful work that their departments were doing.
There was definitely a lot of optimism. You could tell it was night and day between a minister speaking on this and a backbencher speaking on this. They were so polar opposites in many ways.
And the great description, of course, that Chris Thomas used was the Soviet era tractor production up. We may not need the tractors. The tractors may be completely unnecessary, but the great news is tractor production is up. Therefore, we'll focus on tractor production in all our communication.
So is that why Jane Paul Wilson kept referring to him as comrades?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And there was a touch of that. And Laurie Hooper got onto this as well, pointing to the ambition in the original version of Our Island Plan. The ambition was 1,000 homes filled or occupied, new homes, by the end of the administration. I think it was, maybe it was a year or so after. The target or the reporting on that ambition is now 450 planning applications have been supported, and Laurie Hooper rightly pointed out that just because you've supported a planning application, that doesn't give a measure to the actual the ambition. The ambition was that these homes would be occupied, 1,000 of them, and that the evidence, if there is some, it wasn't presented in the report, and that was an example of how he felt, at least, several of the ambitions of the original had been perhaps watered down is too strong a word, but maybe it isn't. Certainly the Chief Minister was very gung-ho and yes.
I mean, you probably have to be when you're the Chief Minister, because you've got to try and not only bring your own Coman along, but you've got to try and pull as many backbenchers along with you. But when I spoke to Jason Morehouse, he just felt like there was a massive disconnect, is what he said. I think you've got the minister standing up and saying, look at all the things that we've achieved, this is what we're going to do in the next 18 months as well. But he's going, well, actually, how realistic is this going to happen in the next 18 months? Because looking at the track records, it doesn't seem to be appearing. These things haven't materialised. So how are you intending to do that? And he feels like where the public's priorities are not quite aligned with what Coman's priorities are.
Yeah, and effectively, the public are saying we need more affordable housing. Government saying we've built another 2,000 tractors, which is I did like that analogy, and I'll stop using it now because we'll move. Well, ultimately the update was supported 15-7 in Keys, 8-0 in Ledgeco. Then we moved on to Ledgeco reform, and it's fair to say that Ms Edge didn't get many takers. The only element of Ledgeco reform that was unanimously supported was in relation to candidates being required to declare their interests before the election takes place, which seems such an obvious thing that it's amazing really that isn't the case at the moment. Interestingly, the Chief Minister broke ranks on the final part of that reform debate, and the final bit was serving MLCs should be required to step down before seeking election to the House of Keys. And yes, Mr Cannon, Ms Edge, Mr Thomas, Mr Wannenberg and Mr Moorhouse were the 5 MHKs supporting that, but there were 17 against, and I haven't recorded what the Ledgeco vote was, but I'm fairly sure it would have been 8-0 against. So
that was where Gary Clewett gave his maiden speech as well, and it was he had several pages worth of stuff, so he'd obviously pre-prepared. But I mean, I think he was talking about like we said, point C, the whole transparency. But I think his main gripe with it was that there are other things that we should be getting on with instead of deciding whether I can do X, Y, and Z.
Some members, in quiet moments off record, were suggesting to me that perhaps there is an issue here in relation to Ledgeco reform, but maybe this wasn't quite the right way to go about having that debate. But we'll see whether any changes happen in the course of the final 18 months of this version of the House of Keys. We then had a general debate on regional government, and this was a debate moved by Chris Thomas and seconded by Julie Edge, and this was after the local authority elections in April 2025, regional government into the 2030s. I'm not. Well, of course, the thing with a general debate is you
don't know what you're going to get.
You've no idea what the outcome is going to be, because you're not asked to vote either for or against something. I'm not entirely convinced I was clear what the outcome of the debate was in terms of what was said.
What are general debates used for, like, primarily? Is it to kind of highlight things to Coman throughout the chamber? Because, like you say, you don't have a vote. I mean, what is the point of them apart from, just having a chat?
I suppose part of it is flushing people out. So one of the things, I'll declare an interest here. I'm the president of ME Support Isle of Man, and we persuaded back in the I think it was around about May 2021. We persuaded some of our support of MHKs to move a general debate about the condition ME, and as a result of that, we were able to get over to all the politicians a lot of issues about the condition, and this actually resulted in the end in a new ME service being established. And one of the reasons I mentioned this is because when we got to the Manx Care mandate, which we haven't got to yet, but we will, the Manx Care mandate appeared to suggest that the service was being cut. Subsequently, Manx Care have clarified that is not the case. But yeah, so general debates are useful in putting
it's almost like
information before people and not taking the risk that actually the members might choose to just say, actually, we've heard this, but we're still going to vote against.
So it's almost like a pressure group, like you're trying to just put the pressure on, see if anything sticks, and maybe something might be considered, like a minister their ear might prick up at something and they might take that away.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing, I think. And then we had various changes in relation to the Harbours Act, the duties and charges amendment regulations, and I think the minister moved item 8. She was halfway through quite a lengthy speech before it was realised that she'd got the wrong one. But then we got on to bylaws in relation to harbours, and there was also registration of pleasure craft number 2 amendment regulations.
It was a bit unnerving listening to them keep saying pleasure craft.
Well, there we are. And then 2 Employment Act related orders, an order and some regulations, coroner's fees, Marine Infrastructure Management Act, and the Climate Change Act. So there was basically a change there because the Climate Change Act had been used to introduce some environmental impact assessment related law, and this had then been swapped over and put under the Marine Infrastructure Management Act. So the one order basically replaced the other, and then there were social services charges amendment regulations were another part of that. So that got us through the order paper, and we finished a little bit later. It was about 1:10 on the Wednesday, and at that point President Skelly was rather keen for the suspension of standing orders to allow for the supplementary order paper to have taken place. And we were already 10 minutes into their dinner times, so it was a bit unusual that the president was so insistent about this. He'd obviously got wind, hadn't he?
Yeah. Yes. I've heard...
when I say he got wind, he got... I don't mean personally, obviously. He'd got wind of something that was about to happen.
No, I'd heard as well from, various MHKs, you're sat on the press bench, they walk past, some of them come over and have a little chat with you. And the impression I got was it could have gone either way. It was very much like on the fence. Whether it didn't happen, and I think that literally was reflected in the votes as well. Well,
it was, because when they did get back after their dinners, whether they had wind or not, the vote was taken. There was a strong speech, it's fair to say, from Laurie Hooper, who said, well, look, I've actually put this down for an actual debate where you can vote whether you support or whether you don't support the Manx Care mandate and operational plan. The minister, of course, was just putting down a general debate, as we've discussed earlier. A general debate. She was trying to flush out what members thought about the plan and the mandate, but there was not going to be a vote on it.
No. But it is unusual, though there's never been a vote on the mandate before. But I think the argument that Laurie Hooper was that this mandate appears to be so far removed from previous ones that he feels like Tynwald members should have a say on whether they can actually change it.
And I
much.
think he went as far as to say a radical shift. So it'll be interesting to see what happens when the April debate happens. But it was lost. It was 14-8 in Keys and 8-0 in Ledgeco, the suspension of standing orders. And again, that would appear, 14-8, you'd think, well, surely that's sufficient, it's in support, but you need 16 votes.
70%.
Yeah. So 14-8 in Keys, 8-0 in Ledgeco, which then meant we were able to get a few interviews done and off home.
So that was two defeats for the government, both on health.
Yeah.
So potentially, would you say that they're now gone away and they're kind of almost a little bit nervous about this vote that's coming up in April?
I'm not so sure, because there were 2 people absent due to various parliamentary business that they were busy with, and so that would have been potentially 16/8 on this Manx care thing. We've seen mini rebellions from the Keys in the past. I don't know. I mean, I could be wrong, but I suspect that government will manage to get over the line in Keys. And despite Legco members saying that they don't just follow the government line, there were an awful lot of 8-0s in favour of the government line from Legco in this March sitting at Tynwald. But that was it. I mean, I'm not sure this is a nutshell that we're putting Tynwald in, or whether it's even in brief, but a fascinating Tynwald.
I learnt a few bits and pieces. For example, I learnt that standing orders was 16 votes, whereas normally it's just a majority. And then you also learned that urgent questions don't class as real questions.
Yeah, that was fascinating. So presumably in the future, everyone's going to be putting urgent questions down, and they can have questions going on for hours.
I did say that to you, that Jason Morehouse has now found a new way of tabling as many questions as possible.
Yeah. Well, we'll see you again at April Tynwald.
Thank you for making it to the end of the Manx Radio Newscast. You are obviously someone with exquisite taste. May I politely suggest you might want to subscribe to this and a wide range of Manx Radio podcasts at your favourite podcast provider, so our best bits will magically appear on your smartphone. Thank you.